The sound of boots crushing gravel woke Ivy Calloway before her eyes even opened. For one terrible second she forgot where she was, and then the smell of hay and horse sweat brought it all back. She was hiding in a stranger's stable, curled behind a stack of feed bags, her hand throbbing where she had cut it climbing over a fence 3 hours earlier. She held her breath. The boots stopped just outside the stall door. A man's voice, low and unhurried, spoke to the horse instead of to her. "Easy, girl. Someone's been keeping you company tonight, hasn't she?" Ivy's heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, but there was nowhere left to go. The stall door creaked open, and morning light spilled across the straw, landing directly on her. The man standing there was tall, dressed in a dark coat despite the warm morning, and he looked at her, the way someone looks at a puzzle rather than a threat. He did not shout, he did not reach for a phone, he simply studied her, from her torn sleeve to her bare, dirt-streaked feet, and then he crouched down to her level, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. "You're bleeding," he said. Ivy pulled her injured hand against her chest. "I'll leave. I didn't take anything. I just needed somewhere quiet for a few hours." "You climbed a 9-foot fence with barbed wire on top to find somewhere quiet." His eyes did not leave hers. "That tells me quiet wasn't really what you were looking for. Safe was." She said nothing. Her mind was racing through excuses, but every one of them sounded thin, even before she said it out loud. "My name is Dante," he said, when she offered nothing back. "This is my land, and you are currently sitting in the stall of the most expensive horse I own, so I think you owe me a name, even if it isn't your real one." "Claire," Ivy lied, the first name that came to her. Dante tilted his head slightly, and for a moment she thought he might call out for help, or for security, or for whoever handled uninvited guests on land like this. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out a clean handkerchief, and held it out to her. "For your hand," he said. "Claire." She hesitated before taking it. Her fingers were shaking, and not just from the cold morning air. She wrapped the cloth around the cut, wincing as the pressure met the wound. "You should have that looked at properly," Dante said, straightening up. "It's deeper than it looks." "I'm fine." "You're a nurse." Ivy froze. "What?" "The way you're checking your own pulse right now without realizing it. The way you assess the depth of that cut before you even wrapped it. You're not just someone who happened to end up in my stable. You know how to take care of a wound because you've done it for other people, many times." He said it plainly, without triumph, the way a man states a fact he has already confirmed in his own head. "So, Nurse Claire, who are you running from?" The directness of the question knocked the breath out of her. She had spent the last 3 hours convincing herself that if she just kept moving, kept her head down, no one would ask the real question so soon. But this stranger had asked it within minutes, and something about the way he asked it made lying feel pointless. "I'm not running from anyone," she said anyway. Dante studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if he had decided to let the lie stand for now. "All right." He turned toward the stable entrance. "Come inside before someone else finds you first. My staff are not known for asking gentle questions." Ivy did not move. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know fear when I see it, and yours is real. That's enough for this morning." He glanced back at her over his shoulder. "The offer doesn't stay open long, Claire. Choose." She looked past him, toward the open stable doors, where the pale early light stretched across a long gravel driveway lined with trees. Beyond that driveway was a road, and beyond that road was a world where Callum was still looking for her, where every hotel and every friend's couch had become a place he could find. She had run out of safe places 3 towns ago. This stranger's stable was simply the last one she had reached before her legs gave out. She stood, favoring her uninjured hand, and followed him. The house, when she saw it properly for the first time, was enormous, in a way that made her stomach tighten. Stone walls, dark wooden shutters, a fountain at the center of the courtyard that had long since stopped running. It did not look like the home of someone who spent his mornings quietly checking on horses. It looked like the home of someone with a great deal to protect, and a great many ways of protecting it. Dante led her through a side door into a kitchen larger than her entire apartment. A woman in an apron looked up in surprise, then quickly schooled her expression into something neutral when she saw Dante's face. "Marta, bring the first aid kit," Dante said, "and something warm to eat, quietly." Marta's eyes flicked to Ivy, taking in the torn clothing and the bloodied handkerchief, and then she nodded once and disappeared without a word. "Quietly," Ivy repeated. "You don't want people to know I'm here." "I don't want people asking questions I haven't decided how to answer yet," Dante said. He gestured to a chair at the long wooden table. "Sit." She sat, mostly because her legs were trembling too much to argue. Marta returned within minutes with a small metal box and a bowl of something warm that smelled like bread and broth. She set both down without meeting Ivy's eyes and left just as quickly as she had come. Dante opened the kit himself, laid out gauze and antiseptic with a practiced hand that surprised Ivy, and gestured for her to give him her injured hand. "You don't need to," she said. "I know I don't." He waited, palm open, until she finally placed her hand in his. His touch was careful as he cleaned the cut, more careful than she expected from a man who lived behind stone walls and unspoken warnings. He worked in silence for a while, and Ivy found herself watching his face instead of her own hand, trying to read what kind of man wrapped an intruder's wound with this much patience. "You're good at this," she said finally. "I've had practice patching up worse than this." He tied off the bandage and set her hand down gently. "There, it should hold until you decide to trust a real doctor." "I am a real doctor. A nurse, anyway." The words slipped out before she could stop them, an admission she had not meant to give. Dante's mouth curved, just slightly, not quite a smile. "There it is." Ivy looked away, furious with herself. "That doesn't change anything." "It changes quite a lot, actually. It tells me you had a life before last night, a job, people who expected you somewhere, and now you're hiding in a stranger's stable instead of going home." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same unreadable patience he'd shown from the very first moment. "So either your home isn't safe, or the people looking for you already know exactly where it is." Ivy's throat tightened. She thought of Callum's face the last time she had seen him, the way his calm voice had been so much more frightening than shouting ever could be. She thought of the badge he carried, the one that meant people believed him over her every single time she tried to explain what he had done. "I need to go," she said abruptly, pushing back from the table. "I've already stayed too long. If anyone connects me to you, it could cause problems, and I don't want that on you. I'll figure something else out." "Sit down," Dante said, and though his voice did not rise, something in it made her stop halfway to standing. "You have nowhere else to go. That much is obvious. And whoever is looking for you is dangerous enough that you were willing to bleed on barbed wire, rather than take your chances with them. I want to know who that is. It's not your problem." "Everything that happens on my land becomes my problem," he said simply. "That includes you, for as long as you're standing on it." Ivy sat back down slowly, unsure whether she felt safer or more trapped than she had in the stable. She studied him now, really studied him, the way she might study a patient whose diagnosis did not yet make sense. Calm hands, careful words, a house full of silence and staff who did not ask questions. Whoever Dante Marchetti was, he was not simply a wealthy man who happened to own horses. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "Someone who can make problems disappear," he said, "if I choose to." "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now." He rose from the table and crossed to the window, looking out over the courtyard, his back to her. "You have a choice, Claire, or whatever your name actually is. You can walk out that door and keep running on your own, the way you have been. Or you can tell me the truth, and let me decide whether it's worth protecting." Ivy wrapped her hands around the warm bowl in front of her, more to steady herself than because she had any appetite. Every instinct she had built over the last several weeks told her to trust no one, to give no names, to stay small and invisible until the danger passed. But something about this man's stillness, the way he had not once raised his voice or reached for his phone, made her wonder if invisibility had already failed her, and if perhaps what she needed now was someone who was impossible to frighten. "His name is Callum," she said finally, the words coming out rough. "He's a police detective. We were engaged. I ended it, after I found out what he does to people who cross him. and now he won't let that go. Dante turned from the window, and for the first time since she had woken in his stable, something sharpened behind his calm expression. "A police detective," he repeated slowly. "That's why no one believes me when I try to explain. He has a badge. I have bruises no one else has seen, and a report that got buried within a day of filing it." Her voice cracked on the last words, the exhaustion of the past weeks finally breaking through the composure she had been forcing since dawn. "I'm not asking you to fix this. I just needed one night where he couldn't find me." Dante was quiet for a long moment, and Ivy braced herself for him to change his mind, to decide that a woman with a corrupt detective hunting her was more trouble than his hospitality could afford. Instead, he walked back to the table and sat across from her again, his expression unreadable, but his voice steady. "You picked the wrong stable to hide in," he said, "and the right man to find you in it." Ivy looked up at him, uncertain whether to feel relief or fresh fear. "What does that mean?" "It means Callum's badge means nothing on this land," Dante said, "and it means you are going to stay here a great deal longer than one night." Before she could respond, the kitchen door opened, and a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit stepped inside, his eyes immediately locking onto Ivy with open suspicion. "Dante," the man said carefully. "Who is she?" Dante did not look away from Ivy as he answered. "She's a guest, Leo. Nothing more. For now." Leo's gaze lingered on Ivy a moment longer, calculating, before he gave a short nod and stepped back out, leaving the door swinging gently behind him. Ivy watched it close, her pulse still racing, and understood with sudden clarity that she had traded one danger for the edge of something far larger, something with rules and loyalties and secrets she did not yet understand. Outside, the horse she had slept beside all night let out a low, restless sound, as if it too sensed that the quiet morning was already over. Dante rose from the table and walked to a small cabinet near the window, taking out a folded blanket and a set of clothes that looked freshly pressed, though far too plain to belong to anyone who lived in a house like this. He set them down in front of her. "These should fit well enough," he said. "You can wash upstairs. Marta will show you the room." Ivy stared at the clothes, then at him. "You keep spare clothes in your kitchen cabinet for strangers you find hiding in your stable?" "I keep spare clothes for situations I don't expect," he said simply. "This is one of them." She gathered the bundle into her arms, feeling the strange, sudden weight of gratitude pressing against her ribs. A feeling she did not fully trust. Gratitude had cost her before. Callum had once seemed kind too, in the beginning, before she understood that kindness could be a tool as easily as a gift. "I don't know how to thank you," she said carefully, watching his face for any sign of what he might expect in return. "You don't need to thank me," Dante said, reading the hesitation in her expression without needing her to explain it. "I'm not asking for anything, Claire. Not now, and not later. When you're ready to trust that, we'll get further." Marta reappeared at the doorway, waiting, and Ivy allowed herself to be led up a wide staircase to a guest room on the second floor. The room was simple compared to what she imagined the rest of the house looked like. Plain walls, a narrow bed, a window that overlooked the stable, and the long tree-lined driveway beyond it. It felt less like a prison, and more like a place someone had prepared quickly, without much thought to comfort, only to safety. She showered in water hot enough to finally loosen the knot that had lived in her shoulders for 3 days straight. When she stepped out and changed into the clothes Dante had given her, she caught her reflection in the mirror above the sink, and barely recognized the woman looking back. Pale, hollow-eyed. Alive at least, which was more than she had been sure of 12 hours earlier. When she came back downstairs, voices drifted from a room off the main hallway, low and urgent. She paused just outside the door, some old instinct from years of avoiding conflict keeping her still and listening rather than announcing herself. "You can't keep her here," Leo was saying, his voice tight with restrained frustration. "We don't know who she is. We don't know who she's running from. And you've put her 2 doors down from files that could end us if the wrong person ever saw them." "I know exactly who she's running from," Dante answered, calm as ever. "A detective named Callum, who beats women and hides behind a badge to do it." There was a pause. "That's not our fight. It is now." "Dante," Leo's voice dropped lower, more careful. Every person we let inside these walls is a risk. You know that better than anyone. If this detective comes looking for her and finds this house instead, we're not dealing with one angry man anymore. We're dealing with an entire department that will want answers, and answers are the one thing this family cannot afford to give. Then we make sure he never finds a reason to come looking here at all, Dante said, quietly, carefully, the way we do everything else. And if he does find her? There was a long silence before Dante answered, and when he did, his voice had lost all of its earlier gentleness, replaced by something colder and far more certain. Then he'll wish he had stayed on his side of the fence. Ivy stepped back from the door, her pulse hammering, unsure whether the words should have frightened her or steadied her. Perhaps both. She had spent weeks being the only person who believed her own story, the only one willing to fight for it. Standing in the hallway of a stranger's house, listening to two men debate the cost of protecting her, she felt something she had not let herself feel in a long time. She felt like someone was finally on her side. She waited a moment longer before stepping fully into view, composing her face into something calmer than she felt. Both men turned when she entered. Leo's expression remained guarded, assessing, the look of a man cataloging every possible danger in the room. Dante's expression, by contrast, eased slightly at the sight of her, though it never fully softened. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Clean, at least," she said. "Warmer." "Good." He gestured toward the table, where Marta had already laid out a proper breakfast, far more than the simple bowl from before. "Eat. Then we'll talk about what happens next." Leo excused himself with a final look at Ivy, one she could not quite read, somewhere between suspicion and reluctant acceptance. When the door closed behind him, Ivy sat across from Dante, the morning light now fuller through the windows, chasing away the last of the pale dawn shadows. "Your friend doesn't trust me," she said. "Leo doesn't trust anyone. It's why he's still alive." Dante poured coffee into 2 cups, sliding one toward her. "But he'll come around. Once he understands there's no version of this where I let you walk back out that gate alone." Ivy wrapped both hands around the warm cup, grateful for something steady to hold on to. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Dante said. "I know you didn't run because you're weak. You ran because you were smart enough to know when staying would get you killed. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." Outside, beyond the window, she could see the stable where she had spent the night, and beyond that, the long driveway stretching toward the gate and the road past it, the road that led back to a city where Callum was almost certainly still searching every corner he could think of. For the first time in 3 days, Ivy allowed herself to imagine that road leading somewhere safer instead, even if she could not yet say why she believed it. She did not know yet how much that belief would cost either of them before the week was through. The phone buzzed against the kitchen counter 3 times before Marta finally answered it, and the moment she did, her face drained of color. "It's for the house," she said quietly, holding the receiver out toward Dante with a shaking hand. "A man asking for someone named Claire." Ivy's stomach dropped straight through the floor. She had been at the estate only 2 days, and already the name she'd invented in a panic was being spoken by a stranger's voice through a telephone line, which meant somehow, somewhere, a thread had been pulled loose. Dante did not rush to the phone. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate slowness, walked over, and took the receiver from Marta's hand. "Wrong number," he said flatly, and hung up before the caller could respond. The silence that followed stretched long and uncomfortable. Ivy sat frozen at the table, her half-finished breakfast forgotten in front of her. "How would anyone know to call here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never told him where I was going. I didn't even know where I was going." "You wouldn't have needed to tell him," Dante said, his jaw tight. "A man like that doesn't wait for information to come to him. He hunts for it." "But this house. How would he even connect me to this house?" Dante was quiet for a moment, turning the question over. "There are only 2 ways. Either someone saw you climb that fence and mentioned it to the wrong person, or your detective has access to more than a badge. Traffic cameras, toll records, phone pings, if you still have your old phone with you." Ivy's hand went instinctively to her pocket, where her phone had sat dead and untouched since the second night of running. the battery long drained, the charger left behind in her rush to leave. I turned it off. I haven't used it in days. Turned off isn't the same as untraceable, Dante said. Give it to me. She hesitated only a moment before pulling the phone from her pocket and sliding it across the table. Dante turned it over in his hands, studying it the way a man studies a wound to determine how deep it runs. This gets destroyed today, he said. If he has any way of tracking its location, even from a signal you sent 3 days ago, it becomes a map leading straight here. That was my only way of reaching my sister, Ivy said, panic edging into her voice. If I lose that, I lose the only way anyone in my old life can find me if something happens. Dante's expression softened, just slightly, the first real crack in his composure since the phone had rung. Then we find you a different way to reach her, one that doesn't put a target on this house. He set the phone down and looked at her directly. I'm not trying to cut you off from everyone who matters to you, Claire. I'm trying to make sure the people hunting you can't use them to find you. Ivy nodded slowly, though the fear had not fully loosened its grip on her chest. She thought of her sister, Nora, back in the city, likely worried sick after days without contact, likely being watched by Callum's associates in case Ivy tried to reach out. The thought made her feel sick with guilt, trapped between protecting herself and abandoning the one person who had believed her from the very beginning. There's something else, Dante said, breaking through her thoughts. Whoever called this house used the name Claire. That means Callum, or someone working for him, already believes you gave that name to whoever is sheltering you, which means he's close enough to know that much, but not close enough to know exactly where you are yet. How is that possible? Because he's not searching randomly, Dante said. He's narrowing a radius. Every day that passes without finding you, that radius gets smaller. If he called this house specifically, it's because your trail led him somewhere near this property, even if he hasn't confirmed it yet. The weight of that settled over the kitchen like a held breath. Ivy pressed her palms flat against the table, trying to steady herself against a wave of dizziness that had nothing to do with hunger or exhaustion, and everything to do with fear, finally catching up to logic. Then I need to leave, she said, tonight, before he narrows that radius any further and decides to search this property directly. No, Dante's answer came immediately, without hesitation. If you leave now, alone, with no plan and no protection, you'll do exactly what he's counting on. You'll panic, you'll move fast and carelessly, and you'll leave a trail even easier to follow than the one you left before. So what do you suggest? That I just stay here and wait for him to knock on the door? I suggest you let me handle it the way I handle everything else, Dante said. Quietly, thoroughly, and on my terms, not his. Later that afternoon, Dante called a meeting in the study, a room Ivy had not yet been shown, lined with dark wooden shelves, and a large map of the region pinned above the fireplace. Leo stood near the window when she entered, arms crossed, his earlier suspicion of her now tempered by something more focused, more strategic. Tell us everything you know about him, Dante said, gesturing for Ivy to sit. Every detail, his routines, his connections, the people he trusts. Nothing is too small. Ivy took a steadying breath and began. She told them about Callum's precinct, about the partner who covered for him whenever complaints were filed, about the way he had learned to read her schedule at the hospital better than she knew it herself. She told them about the night she had finally seen the full truth of him, the night that had sent her running with nothing but the clothes on her back and a hastily packed bag she had abandoned somewhere along a highway 2 states away. Leo listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes onto a small pad, his earlier hostility replaced now by something closer to professional focus. When Ivy finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. He's not just dangerous because he's angry, Leo said finally, looking to Dante. He's dangerous because he has resources most people running from an ex-partner don't have to deal with. Badge access, database access, colleagues willing to look the other way. This isn't a simple protection job. I'm aware, Dante said. Then you're aware this could bring more attention to this house than we can afford right now, Leo pressed. We have enough eyes on us already, without inviting a detective's personal manhunt onto our land. He won't bring official attention, Dante said. Not if what Claire is telling us is true. A man abusing his position the way Callum has doesn't want more eyes on his own behavior. He wants this handled quietly, off the record, which means he'll come here alone or with someone equally unofficial. That works in our favor. Ivy looked between the two men, feeling suddenly like a piece on a chessboard being discussed in terms she barely understood. What exactly are you planning to do? For now, Dante said, nothing dramatic. We tighten security around the property without making it obvious. We find you a way to contact your sister safely, through a channel he can't trace. And we wait to see how close he actually gets before we decide anything further. And if he gets too close? Dante's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. Then we make sure he understands. This is the last place on earth he ever wants to come looking for you again. That evening, after Leo had left to arrange for new security along the property's outer fence line, Dante found Ivy sitting alone on the back terrace, watching the sun sink behind the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep red. You've been quiet since the study, he said, taking the seat beside her. I keep thinking about how easily he found this address, she admitted. 3 days, Dante. 3 days and he already had a name and a location close enough to call. That tells you something important about him, Dante said. Not that he's unbeatable. Just that he's thorough. Thorough men can still be outmaneuvered. It simply takes patience. You sound very confident for someone who just learned about all this a few hours ago. I've dealt with thorough men before, Dante said, a faint, humorless smile touching his mouth. It's usually the ones who believe themselves untouchable, who make the most careless mistakes in the end. Ivy studied his profile in the fading light, the sharp line of his jaw, the calm that never seemed to fully leave his expression, even when the conversation turned dark. Why are you doing all this? Really, you could have handed me over to your men that first morning and been done with it. Instead, you're rearranging your entire household, risking your own security, over someone you met 2 days ago. Dante was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with more weight than she expected. My mother used to hide women like you, he said finally. Women running from men who thought their badges or their money made them untouchable. She never asked questions about what they'd done to deserve help. She only asked what they needed to feel safe again. He looked out over the darkening tree line. I was young when she died, but I remember enough to know what she'd want me to do in this exact situation. Ivy felt something in her chest loosen at the admission. A small piece of the wall she'd been holding up against him lowering, if only slightly. I'm sorry. About your mother. It was a long time ago. He turned to look at her fully now, his expression softer than she had seen it since the stable. But it's part of why I won't let Callum, or anyone like him, walk onto this land and take what he wants, simply because he believes no one will stop him. They sat together in silence as the last light faded from the sky, the sound of horses shifting restlessly in the stable carrying faintly on the evening air. Ivy did not know yet how deep this new alliance would pull her, or what it would eventually cost the man sitting beside her to keep his promise. But for the first time since she had started running, she let herself believe, just slightly, that she might not have to run alone anymore. Later that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Ivy woke to the soft sound of voices drifting up from the courtyard below her window. She rose carefully and peered down through the gap in the curtains, finding Dante standing near the fountain with a man she did not recognize, someone in a plain jacket who kept glancing nervously toward the main gate as he spoke. She couldn't make out the words, but she could read the tension in both men's postures, the careful way the stranger kept his voice low even from this distance. When the man finally left, slipping out through a side gate rather than the main drive, Dante stood alone in the courtyard for a long moment, staring toward the road beyond the property line as if he could see something out there that troubled him deeply. Ivy stepped back from the window, her heart beating fast, and understood with sudden clarity that whatever Dante was building to protect her had already begun moving pieces she knew nothing about. She had traded one kind of danger for shelter inside another, and she was only now beginning to understand just how large that shelter truly was, and how much it might eventually demand from both of them before this was over. The next morning, Dante kept his promise about her sister. He arrived at breakfast carrying a small, unfamiliar phone, still sealed in its box, and set it down in front of her without explanation until she looked up at him, confused. It's registered under a name that doesn't exist, he said. No account tied to you, no billing address, nothing that connects back to this house, or to your old number. You can call her once, briefly, and then the phone goes into a drawer until we need it again. Ivy's hands trembled slightly as she opened the box. Just once? For now, every call is a risk, even one this careful. We keep the risks small and far apart. He nodded toward the terrace doors. Go somewhere private. Take as long as you need, but keep it under 5 minutes. She stepped outside, sat on the low stone wall near the garden, and dialed the number she had memorized since childhood. One of the only numbers she had never bothered saving because she had never needed to. It rang twice before her sister answered, and the sound of Nora's voice, cracked with worry and relief, nearly undid her completely. Ivy? Oh my God. Ivy, where have you been? I've called the police. I've called everyone. I thought. I'm safe, Ivy said quickly, cutting off the spiral before it could fully take hold. I'm safe, Nora, I promise. I can't explain everything right now, but I found somewhere safe to stay. Safe where? With who? Ivy. Callum came to my apartment 2 days ago. He said he was worried about you, that you'd had some kind of breakdown, that he just wanted to help you get proper care. Nora's voice shook with barely controlled anger. I didn't believe him. I told him I hadn't heard from you either. But Ivy, he looked through my window before he left. He stood in my driveway for almost 10 minutes after I closed the door, just staring at the house. Ivy's stomach twisted painfully. Did he say anything else? Anything about where he thought I might be? No, but he's not going to stop, Ivy. You know he's not going to stop. He's already telling people at the hospital that you're unstable, that you stopped taking some kind of medication and ran off. People are starting to believe him because he says it so calmly, like he actually believes it himself. He's building a story, Ivy murmured, half to herself. So that if anyone finds me, they'll think I'm the danger instead of him. What do we do? Ivy glanced back toward the house, where she could see Dante's shape moving past a window, still visible even through the distance and the glass. I have people helping me now. Real help, Nora, not just running. I need you to be careful, and I need you to trust that I'll reach out again when it's safe. Can you do that? There was a long pause on the line, filled with the sound of her sister's unsteady breathing. I trust you, Nora finally said. I just don't trust him. Please, Ivy, please be careful. I will, Ivy promised. Though even as she said it, she wasn't entirely certain it was a promise she could keep. She ended the call exactly 4 minutes after it began, sitting alone on the stone wall for a long moment afterward, absorbing everything her sister had told her. Callum was not simply searching. He was preparing a version of events where Ivy herself became the unstable one, the unreliable one, so that if she ever resurfaced, no one would believe a word she said against him. It was a strategy she recognized now, one he had used in smaller ways throughout their relationship, reshaping every argument until she was the one apologizing by the end of it. When she returned to the house, Dante was waiting near the kitchen door, reading something in her expression before she said a word. He's already working the narrative, Dante said, not quite a question. How did you know? Because that's exactly what a man like that does when hunting doesn't work fast enough. He makes sure that even if you're found, no one believes what you say when you are. Dante's jaw tightened. It's a common move. I've seen it before, from other men, in other situations. It rarely works as well as they think it will. It's working well enough that my sister is scared for me in a completely different way now, Ivy said. Scared that people will believe him, instead of me. Then we make sure that story falls apart before it ever reaches anyone who matters, Dante said. Give me time, Claire. I know that's not much comfort right now, but it's the truest thing I can offer you. Ivy looked at him for a long moment, weighing the strange comfort of his certainty against the very real fear still coiled tight in her chest. She thought of the stranger in the courtyard the night before, of the pieces already moving that she did not fully understand, and wondered, not for the first time, exactly how far Dante Marchetti was prepared to go to keep his word. The gate alarm went off just after noon, a sharp electronic pulse that sent every member of the household staff moving at once. Ivy dropped the mug she had been holding, the ceramic shattering across the kitchen floor, but no one stopped to clean it. Dante was already striding toward the front hall, Leo close behind him, both men speaking in low, rapid tones that Ivy could not follow. "Stay upstairs," Dante said to her without slowing his pace. "Whatever happens, stay upstairs and out of sight." "Is it him?" Ivy asked, her voice tight with fear. "Is it Callum? We're about to find out." He paused just long enough to meet her eyes. "I need you to trust me right now, more than you've trusted anyone in a long time." She nodded, though her legs felt unsteady beneath her, and retreated up the staircase as instructed. From the window of her room, she had a clear view of the front gate and the long driveway leading up to it, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. Callum stood just outside the gate, dressed not in his police uniform but in plain clothes, his badge held up toward the small intercom camera mounted on the stone pillar. Even from this distance, she recognized the particular tilt of his head, the calm, reasonable posture he adopted whenever he wanted to appear like the most trustworthy man in any room. Two of Dante's men flanked the gate on the inside, neither moving to open it, both watching Callum with the flat, unreadable expressions of men who had handled far worse visitors than a single detective with a badge. Dante walked out to meet him personally, and Ivy pressed herself close to the window glass, straining to hear anything through the distance, catching only fragments carried on the wind. "Looking for a woman who may have wandered onto your property," Callum was saying, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to being believed. "She's unwell, not dangerous, just confused. Her family is very worried." "I haven't seen anyone matching that description," Dante replied, his tone perfectly level, betraying nothing. "This is private land, detective. I would have noticed a stranger wandering it." "Would you mind if my colleagues did a quick sweep of the grounds, just to put everyone's mind at ease?" "I would mind a great deal," Dante said. "This property is private, and unless you're carrying a warrant, I'm afraid that sweep isn't happening today." There was a pause, long enough that Ivy could see Callum's posture shift, the reasonable mask slipping just slightly before he caught himself and smoothed it back into place. "Of course. I understand. I apologize for the intrusion." He glanced past Dante, up toward the house itself, his gaze sweeping methodically across the windows. Ivy stepped back instinctively, even though she knew the distance made it unlikely he could see her at all. "If you do happen to see anyone matching her description, I'd appreciate a call. She could be in real danger, wandering around unfamiliar territory alone." "I'll keep that in mind," Dante said, in a tone that made it clear the conversation was over. Callum lingered a moment longer, his eyes tracing the length of the property visible from the gate, before finally turning and walking back toward a plain sedan parked along the shoulder of the road. He did not leave immediately. Ivy watched, her chest tight, as he sat in the car for several long minutes, simply looking at the house, before finally pulling away. By the time Dante returned inside, Ivy had come down to meet him at the base of the staircase, unable to wait any longer in the isolation of her room. "He knows," she said before Dante could speak. "I could see it in the way he looked at the house. He knows I'm here." "He suspects," Dante corrected. "There's a difference. If he knew for certain, he wouldn't have come alone, and he wouldn't have asked so politely for permission to search." He rubbed a hand across his jaw, the first visible sign of tension she had seen from him since this began. "He's testing the boundary, seeing how we respond, whether we react like people with something to hide." "And how did we respond?" "Exactly the way we should have. Calm, firm, nothing that gives him a reason to escalate yet." Dante's expression darkened slightly. "But he'll be back. Men like that don't walk away from a locked gate without eventually finding a way around it." That evening, Leo called another meeting in the study, and this time, his earlier reluctance about Ivy's presence had shifted into something sharper, more urgent. "He's not working alone," Leo said, spreading a set of photographs across the desk, images that made Ivy's stomach drop the moment she saw them. Callum, standing outside a diner she vaguely recognized from the outskirts of the city, speaking with two men she had never seen before. "These two aren't police. We ran their faces. They work for the Renzo family." Dante went very still. "The Renzos. They've been looking for an opening against us for over a year," Leo continued. "If Callum has connected with them, even informally, it means he's not just hunting Claire on his own anymore." He's found people with far more resources than a single detective's salary could ever provide, and in exchange, he's likely offering them something they want just as badly. Which is what? Ivy asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer. A reason to move against this family that doesn't look like naked aggression, Dante said quietly. If they can frame this as helping a corrupt detective recover a missing, unstable woman, and we're the ones standing in the way, it gives them exactly the justification they need to escalate without looking like the aggressors. Ivy sank into the nearest chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. This is my fault. I brought this here. No, Dante said firmly, crossing the room to crouch in front of her chair, forcing her to meet his eyes. You brought a man's cruelty here. You didn't create it. The Renzos have wanted an excuse to move against this family long before you ever climbed that fence. Callum simply handed them a convenient one. That doesn't make it easier to sit here and know that I'm the reason people you care about might get hurt. Then let me carry that weight instead of you, Dante said. It's mine to carry, not yours. Leo cleared his throat, breaking the moment. There's something else you should know. One of the men in that photograph, the taller one, he's been seen near the hospital where Claire used to work. Twice this week. Ivy's blood ran cold. Watching the staff? Trying to find out if I've contacted anyone there? Most likely, Leo said. Which means it's not just this property they're circling anymore. They're widening the search, covering every place you might try to reach out to. Dante stood, his expression hardening into something colder and more decisive than Ivy had seen from him yet. Then we stop reacting to their moves and start controlling the board ourselves. What does that mean? Ivy asked. It means we give Callum exactly the confrontation he's been circling toward, but on ground we choose, under terms we control, Dante said. Right now he's hunting in the dark, gathering allies, testing boundaries. If we let that continue unchecked, eventually he'll find a way in that we don't see coming. I'd rather force his hand now, while we still have the advantage of choosing when and where. Leo looked skeptical. That's a significant risk, Dante. If this goes wrong, it doesn't just endanger her. It gives the Renzos exactly the confrontation they've been hoping for. I'm aware of the risk, Dante said. I'm also aware that doing nothing carries an equally dangerous cost. We wait too long, and they choose the moment instead of us. Ivy looked between the two men, feeling once again like a piece being moved across a board far larger than she had ever imagined when she first climbed that fence 3 days ago. What do you need from me? For now, nothing but patience, Dante said, his voice softening slightly as he looked at her. But there may come a point where I need you to trust a plan you don't fully understand yet, executed faster than feels comfortable. When that moment comes, I need to know you'll trust me. I already do, Ivy said, surprising herself with how easily the words came, how true they felt even amid the fear tightening around her chest. I trusted you the moment you didn't call your men on me that first morning. I'm not about to stop now. Something shifted in Dante's expression, brief and unguarded, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Then let's make sure that trust was well placed. Later that night, long after the study had emptied and the house had settled into an uneasy quiet, Ivy found herself unable to sleep, her mind circling endlessly through everything Leo had revealed. She rose from her bed and walked to the window, half expecting to see Dante again in the courtyard below, but this time the space was empty, with the fountain silent, the moon casting long shadows across the gravel. A soft knock sounded at her door a few minutes later. She opened it to find Dante standing there, still fully dressed despite the late hour, a folder tucked beneath his arm. I couldn't sleep either, he admitted, before she could ask. I wanted you to see this before tomorrow. He handed her the folder, and inside she found copies of the reports she had filed against Callum months earlier, the ones that had mysteriously vanished from the department's system within days of being submitted. Alongside them were newer documents, records Leo's contacts had apparently gathered over the past 2 days, financial transfers between Callum and members of the Renzo organization, small but consistent, stretching back nearly 3 weeks before Ivy had ever fled her apartment. He was already working with them, Ivy said slowly, piecing the timeline together in her head. Before I even ran. This wasn't just him chasing me out of anger. This was already planned. It appears that way, Dante confirmed, which changes things considerably. This isn't simply a man hunting an ex-partner out of wounded pride. This is a coordinated effort, and you may have been a convenient piece of leverage he could use to draw us into direct conflict from the very beginning. Ivy looked up at him, the full weight of the revelation settling heavy in her chest. Then this was never really about me at all. It became about you the moment you climbed that fence, Dante said quietly. But you're right that it started as something else entirely, something bigger, and considerably more dangerous than either of us realized 3 days ago. Outside, somewhere beyond the tree line, a car engine hummed faintly along the distant road, and both of them fell silent, listening until the sound faded completely into the night. "Can I ask you something?" Ivy said, once the silence had stretched long enough to feel safe again. "Of course. Why does the Renzo family want a reason to move against yours so badly? Leo made it sound like this has been building for a long time, long before I ever showed up." Dante leaned against the doorframe, considering how much to share. "My father and their father built an understanding decades ago. Territory, respect, certain lines neither side crossed. When my father died and I took over, the old man running the Renzos decided a younger leader meant a weaker one. He spent 3 years testing that theory in small ways. A supplier poached here, a shipment delayed there. Nothing large enough to justify open conflict, but enough to see how far he could push before I pushed back." "And you never did? Push back?" "Small conflicts invite small retaliation," Dante said. "I've been patient, because patience keeps the peace and keeps the people who depend on this family safe. But patience has a limit, and I think he's been waiting for exactly the kind of opening Callum has now handed him. A woman in danger, a detective with a badge, a story that lets him move against me while appearing to be the reasonable party." Ivy absorbed this, turning the folder over in her hands. "So if this goes wrong, it's not just my life at risk. It's an entire war between two families." "It's a war that's been circling for years regardless of you," Dante said. "You didn't start it. You've simply become the spark someone else has been waiting for." He reached out, gently taking the folder back from her hands and tucking it beneath his arm again. "That's not a burden I want you carrying tonight. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start making sure that spark doesn't turn into anything larger than it needs to." He turned to leave, but Ivy's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Dante." He looked back. "Thank you. For showing me this instead of keeping it from me. I know. It would have been easier to let me believe this was simple." "Nothing about this has been simple since the moment I found you in that stall," he said, a faint, tired smile touching his mouth for the first time that night. "I stopped pretending otherwise days ago." The door closed softly behind him, and Ivy stood alone in the quiet of her room for a long while afterward, the moonlight tracing pale lines across the floor. She thought of her sister, still waiting anxiously for a call that might not come again for days. She thought of the 2 men in the photograph, circling closer to the hospital where she used to work, to the small, ordinary life she had built before Callum had unraveled it thread by thread. And she thought of Dante, standing calm and certain in front of a locked gate, absorbing a threat that had never truly belonged to him until she arrived. She did not sleep easily that night. Every sound outside her window, every distant hum of an engine on the road beyond the trees, sent her pulse spiking before she could remind herself that the gate was locked, that Dante's men were watching every inch of the property, that for tonight at least, she was still safe. Sometime near dawn, she finally drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, and dreamed not of Callum's calm, dangerous voice, but of the stable where this had all begun, the warm smell of hay and horse, and a stranger's steady hands wrapping careful gauze around a wound she had almost stopped noticing. When she woke, the sun was already high, and the house below her was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that comes not from peace, but from everyone holding their breath at once, waiting for whatever was coming next. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, expecting to find Dante at the kitchen table, as he had been every morning since her arrival. Instead, she found only Marta, quietly wiping down counters that already looked spotless, her movements too careful, too deliberate, the way people move when they are trying not to think about something frightening. "Where is he?" Ivy asked. Marta glanced toward the front of the house. "He left before sunrise, him and Leo both. They didn't say where. Ivy's chest tightened. Did something happen? Is it Callum? I only heard pieces, Marta admitted, setting down her cloth. Something about the Renzo men being spotted again, closer this time. Leo wanted to move before whoever was watching us decided to move first. She hesitated, studying Ivy's worried expression with something like sympathy. He told me to tell you not to worry, that he'd be back before evening. That's easy for him to say, Ivy murmured, sinking into a chair. He's not the one sitting here imagining every possible way this could go wrong. Marta offered a small, understanding smile. For what it's worth, I've worked in this house a long time. I've seen him handle far worse mornings than this one. He does not make promises he cannot keep. Ivy wanted to believe that completely, but the empty chair across the table, the one Dante had occupied every morning since she arrived, felt like a hollow reminder of exactly how much had changed in only a few days, and how much further there still was to fall before any of this found its ending. Dante did not return before evening, as Marta had promised, and by the time the sun dropped fully behind the tree line, Ivy had worn a path back and forth across the length of the front hallway, checking the driveway through the window every few minutes, as though her watching alone might summon the sound of an approaching car. It was nearly 9 when she finally saw the headlights sweep across the gravel, and she was at the front door before Marta could stop her, pulling it open just as Dante and Leo climbed out of a dark sedan, both men moving slower than usual, a tightness in their shoulders that told her something had gone wrong, long before either of them said a word. What happened? Ivy demanded, stepping out onto the porch despite Leo's warning glance toward the open grounds. Inside, Dante said, his voice rough with exhaustion. We'll talk inside. Once the study door closed behind them, Dante finally allowed the careful composure he wore in front of the staff to slip, dropping heavily into a chair and rubbing a hand across his face. A shallow cut ran along his jaw, not deep, but fresh enough that Ivy's nursing instincts flared instantly to life. You're hurt, she said, already crossing the room toward him. It's nothing, Dante said, though he didn't stop her when she reached for the small cut, tilting his head slightly to give her better access. What happened? She repeated, cleaning the cut with quick, practiced movements while she waited for an answer. Leo answered instead, dropping into the chair across from them. We went to meet with one of the Renzo lieutenants, someone who's grown tired of the old man's ambitions and was willing to talk, quietly, in exchange for certain guarantees. He confirmed everything the photographs suggested. Callum approached them 3 weeks ago, offering information about our operations in exchange for their help finding Claire and eliminating any obstacle standing in the way, meaning us. Eliminating, Ivy repeated, the word landing like a stone in her stomach. You mean he wants me dead, not just found? He wants you controlled, Dante said quietly. Whether that means found and silenced, or found and discredited so thoroughly no one ever believes you again, I don't think even he has fully decided yet. But the men helping him are not interested in your survival being convenient for their plans. Then how did you end up hurt? Ivy pressed, finishing the last of the bandage along his jaw. The lieutenant wasn't alone when we arrived, Leo said grimly. 2 of the old man's personal guards were watching the meeting point. It seems our informant wasn't quite as discreet as he believed himself to be. We got out, Dante said, catching the alarm rising in Ivy's expression. No one was seriously hurt, but it confirmed something we needed to know. The old man is watching every move his own people make right now, which means he already suspects someone close to him is unhappy with this plan. That's good, isn't it? Ivy asked. If there's dissent among them. It's useful, Dante corrected, but it also means our window for acting quietly is closing faster than I hoped. If the old man tightens control over his own organization, Callum loses the flexible, deniable allies he's been counting on, which means he'll be forced to either back down or take matters into his own hands directly. And which do you think he'll choose? Dante's expression hardened. Men like Callum rarely back down. They simply change strategy. The house fell into an uneasy rhythm over the following 2 days, every routine task carrying an undercurrent of tension that had not existed before. Extra guards patrolled the outer fence line in shifts. Leo spent hours on calls Ivy was not permitted to overhear. Dante moved through the house with a quiet, coiled focus. the calm patience of their first meeting now sharpened into something far more watchful. On the third night, Ivy woke to raised voices somewhere below her window, and this time she did not hesitate before rushing to see what was happening. From the top of the staircase, she could see Leo standing near the front door, speaking urgently into a phone, his free hand gripping the doorframe hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "Say that again," Leo said into the phone, his voice tight. Slowly. Dante appeared from the hallway below, already dressed despite the late hour, and crossed to Leo's side just as the call ended. "What is it?" Dante asked. "Callum filed a missing persons report," Leo said, lowering the phone slowly. "Officially, through the department this time, he's claiming Claire, using her real name now, was last seen near this region before vanishing. He's requesting a formal welfare check on every property within a 10-mile radius, starting tomorrow morning." Ivy's breath caught. From the staircase, she could see the exact moment the color drained slightly from Dante's face, the first true crack in his composure since this entire ordeal had begun. "He's found a way to bring the police here without a warrant," Dante said slowly. "Under the guise of a welfare check, they don't need one. They simply need probable cause that someone might be in danger." "Can he do that?" Ivy called down, no longer able to stay silent, descending the stairs quickly to join them. "Can he just claim I'm missing and send officers to search every house nearby?" "He's a detective with a badge and a convincing story," Leo said grimly. "Right now, yes, he absolutely can." Ivy pressed a hand against her chest, trying to steady the panic clawing its way up her throat. "Then it's over. If they search this house and find me here, it won't matter what really happened between us. He'll spin it exactly the way he wants, and I'll be the one they believe is unstable, being hidden away by criminals." "It's not over," Dante said firmly, though the tightness in his voice betrayed how seriously he was taking the threat. "But it does mean we no longer have the luxury of moving slowly." He turned to Leo. "How many properties within that radius belong to families connected to us?" "3, including this one," Leo said. "The Kowalski place to the east, and the old vineyard property near the river." "Get Claire moved to the vineyard property before sunrise," Dante said. "It's smaller, less obviously connected to us on paper, and far enough outside the immediate search radius that it buys us time." "And you?" Ivy asked. "What happens here, if they come looking and don't find me?" "Then they find nothing worth reporting, and Callum's welfare check turns up empty, which makes his official story look increasingly unstable rather than yours," Dante said. "But that only works if you're genuinely somewhere they won't think to look." The next few hours passed in a blur of hurried preparation. Ivy gathered the few belongings she had accumulated since arriving, while Leo arranged a car and driver to take her across the property under cover of darkness, avoiding the main road entirely, in favor of a narrow service path that wound through the eastern fields. Dante walked her to the car himself, his expression tight with the particular strain of a man forced to send someone he had grown to care about into further uncertainty rather than keeping her close enough to protect directly. "This isn't goodbye," he said, holding the car door open for her. "It's a few days, maybe less, until we know how the welfare check plays out, and whether Callum escalates further." "I know," Ivy said, though the fear in her chest made the words feel thinner than she wanted them to. "Someone will be with you the entire time," Dante continued. "You won't be alone there." "I trust you," Ivy said again, the same words she had offered him days earlier in the study, and this time they felt heavier, more certain, carrying the full weight of everything they had built together in such a short, dangerous span of time. Dante studied her for a long moment in the pale pre-dawn light, something unguarded passing behind his eyes before he spoke again. "When this is over, and it will be over, I want you to stay, not because you have nowhere else to go, because I want you here." Ivy's breath caught at the admission, unexpected and quietly sincere amid the chaos surrounding them. Before she could find the right words to answer, Leo's voice called urgently from near the gate, warning that the car needed to leave immediately if it wanted to clear the eastern fields before the first hint of sunrise touched the sky. "Go," Dante said, stepping back from the car. "Stay safe. I'll come for you myself the moment it's clear." Ivy nodded, unable to trust her voice, and climbed into the back seat, As the driver pulled away from the estate, the dark shape of the house shrinking behind her, until it disappeared entirely behind the tree line. The vineyard property sat quiet and unremarkable beside a slow-moving river, its rows of old vines stretching in neat lines toward a low stone farmhouse that looked nothing like the estate Ivy had grown used to. A woman named Grace met her at the door, introduced only as a longtime friend of the family, her manner calm and practical, in a way that reminded Ivy faintly of Marta. "You'll be safe here," Grace said, leading her inside. "Quiet mostly. No one comes down this road unless they mean to." Ivy nodded, too exhausted and too anxious to do more than murmur her thanks, before Grace showed her to a small room at the back of the house, overlooking the river instead of a driveway. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, listening to the water outside, and tried not to imagine everything that might be happening back at the estate she had just left behind. She did not have to imagine for long. Just after 7 that morning, 3 unmarked cars turned onto the long driveway of Dante's estate, moving with none of the careful hesitation Callum had shown at the gate days earlier. This time, he did not wait politely at the intercom. He stepped out of the lead car flanked by 4 men in plain clothes, his badge already raised, his expression set into the calm, reasonable mask he wore so well. Dante met them at the gate himself, Leo a half-step behind him, both men deliberately unarmed, deliberately calm, giving Callum no excuse to claim the visit had turned hostile before it even began. "This is a welfare check," Callum announced, loud enough for the guards stationed nearby to hear clearly. "I have reasonable cause to believe a missing woman may be present on this property. I'd like to conduct a search, starting with the main residence." "You're welcome to search the grounds visible from where you're standing," Dante said evenly, "but without a warrant, you don't set foot past this gate." "A woman's life may be at risk," Callum pressed, his voice sharpening slightly beneath the practiced calm. "Are you willing to obstruct a welfare check and explain that decision to a judge?" "I'm willing to insist on the same rights any citizen has," Dante replied. "If you have genuine cause, detective, a warrant takes less than an hour to secure. I'll wait right here while you get one." Callum's jaw tightened, the mask slipping just enough for Dante to see the frustration beneath it. For a long moment, neither man moved, the tension between them stretching taut across the quiet morning air. "You're hiding her," Callum said finally, lower now, meant only for Dante to hear. "I don't know how you found her or why you care, but I will find her eventually. This delay only makes things worse for everyone involved when I do. If she exists at all, the way you describe her," Dante said, matching his quiet tone, "then perhaps the reason she ran so far from you is worth considering more carefully than the reason you're chasing her." Something flickered behind Callum's eyes, brief and dangerous, before he stepped back, forcing his expression back into practiced composure for the benefit of the men watching. "I'll be back with that warrant," he said, "and when I am, I expect full cooperation." "You'll have it," Dante said, "assuming the warrant is legitimate." Callum turned and walked back to his car without another word, his men following close behind, and within minutes the 3 unmarked vehicles pulled away from the gate, leaving the estate quiet once more. Leo exhaled slowly beside Dante, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "That bought us time. Not much, but some. Enough to make sure a warrant, if he actually secures one, finds nothing worth reporting here," Dante said, already turning back toward the house. "Get word to Grace. I want extra caution at the vineyard property until we know exactly how far he's willing to push this." By the time Dante finally reached Ivy that evening, driving out to the vineyard himself, under the cover of darkness, rather than trusting the message to a phone call, she had spent the entire day pacing the small farmhouse, imagining every possible version of what might have happened. "He came," Dante confirmed, once they were alone in the quiet kitchen, Grace having tactfully excused herself to check on the horses stabled nearby. "With men who weren't wearing uniforms. Exactly as we feared. But he didn't have a warrant, and without one, there was nothing he could legally do beyond threaten to return with one." "Will he return with one?" "Possibly," Dante admitted, "though I suspect actually securing one may prove more difficult than he expects, given how quietly he'd prefer to keep this entire situation. A formal warrant means formal paperwork, means other officers eventually asking questions about why a detective is personally leading a welfare check search on private land connected to organized crime. That kind of scrutiny is exactly what he's been trying to avoid from the beginning. Ivy sank into a chair at the small kitchen table, some of the day's accumulated fear finally loosening its grip on her chest. So we're safe, for now. For now, Dante agreed, though something in his tone made her look up sharply. But he's growing desperate, Dante said. Desperate men make dangerous choices. The official channel failed him today. That means tomorrow, or the day after, he'll likely try something far less official, and far harder to predict. Ivy nodded slowly, absorbing the warning. Then what do we do? Dante reached across the table, covering her hand with his own, the gesture simple and steady amid everything unraveling around them. We stop waiting for him to make the next move, he said. Tomorrow, we make ours. Before he left that night, Dante lingered a moment longer than necessary at the farmhouse door, watching Ivy in the dim kitchen light, as though committing the sight of her, safe and unharmed, to memory, before returning to whatever uncertainty tomorrow would bring. You should get some sleep, he said quietly. Tomorrow will take everything you have. Will you tell me the plan? Before it happens, I mean, not after. Dante considered the request for a long moment. Some of it, he said finally. Enough for you to understand your role in it, if it comes to that. But some pieces are safer left unspoken until the moment they're needed. Not because I don't trust you, Claire. Because the fewer people who know every detail in advance, the fewer chances there are for something to leak before we're ready. Ivy accepted that, though the uncertainty still sat uneasily in her chest. Just promise me one thing. If I can. Don't let this turn into something where people get seriously hurt because of me. I've already caused enough damage just by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dante crossed the small distance between them, tilting her chin up gently until she met his eyes. You didn't cause any of this, he said, firm and certain. A man who could not accept being told no caused this. Everything that happens from here forward is the result of his choices, not yours. Remember that, whatever happens tomorrow. She nodded, though the words settled only partially against the guilt she had been carrying since the moment she first climbed that fence. Dante held her gaze a moment longer, then pressed a light, careful kiss to her forehead before stepping back toward the door. Rest, he said again. I'll send word the moment there's anything to report. She watched his car disappear down the long gravel drive, the taillights fading into darkness, and stood at the window long after the sound of the engine had vanished completely into the quiet countryside night. Gunfire was not what woke Ivy before dawn. It was silence, sudden and complete, the kind that follows a sound so sharp it stops the entire world from breathing. She sat upright in bed, heart pounding, straining to hear anything beyond the rushing of blood in her own ears, and then Grace was at her door, pale and urgent, pulling her out of bed before she could even ask what had happened. We need to move, Grace said, now. What's going on? Men came through the eastern field 20 minutes ago. Leo's people caught them before they reached the house, but there are more coming, and Dante wants you moved somewhere safer immediately. Ivy's stomach twisted violently. Is anyone hurt? I don't know yet. Grace was already pulling a coat around Ivy's shoulders, guiding her toward the back door. We'll find out together, but not standing here. They moved quickly through the dark, following a narrow path along the riverbank that Grace clearly knew well, toward a small boathouse, tucked beneath overhanging trees. Ivy's mind raced through every worst possibility as they went, imagining Dante hurt, or worse, imagining that everything he had built to protect her had finally collapsed under the weight of Callum's desperation. They reached the boathouse, just as the first hint of gray dawn touched the sky, and Grace's phone buzzed with a message that made her exhale sharply in relief. It's over, Grace said, showing Ivy the screen. Dante's fine. Leo's fine. They need you back at the main house. He wants to explain everything himself. The drive back felt endless, every mile stretching Ivy's nerves tighter, until finally the familiar stone walls of the estate came into view, the courtyard bathed in the pale gold light of early morning. Dante was waiting near the fountain when the car pulled up, a fresh bruise darkening along one cheekbone, but standing steady and whole, and Ivy was out of the car and across the courtyard before the driver had even fully stopped. "You're hurt," she said, her hands already reaching to examine the bruise with the same instinctive care she had shown him days earlier in the study. "It looks worse than it is," Dante said, though he let her check anyway, some of the night's tension visibly easing simply from her presence beside him again. Callum finally abandoned every pretense of a legal search. He came with the Renzo men through the eastern field before dawn, hoping to catch us unprepared. "But you weren't unprepared." "No," Dante said, "because we spent yesterday exactly as I promised." "Preparing." He nodded toward the house, where Leo stood near the entrance, speaking quietly with two men Ivy did not recognize, both dressed in the kind of plain, unremarkable clothing that suggested they were not accustomed to drawing attention to themselves. "Come inside. There's a great deal to explain, and I'd rather you hear all of it from me directly." Before they went inside, Ivy insisted on seeing exactly what had happened at the eastern field, and Dante, after a moment's hesitation, agreed to walk her there himself. The field looked deceptively ordinary in the morning light, rows of tall grass swaying gently in the breeze, no sign of the chaos that had unfolded there only hours earlier, except for a few flattened patches where men had clearly moved quickly through the tall stalks. Dermane described it as they walked, his voice steady, but quieter than usual. "Leo's contact warned us the approach would come from this direction, timed for the hour before dawn when visibility is worst and reaction time slowest," he said. "We used that advantage, positioned people along the tree line before they ever crossed onto the property, and let them believe they were still undetected until it was already far too late for them to retreat safely." "Was Callum with them? At the front, I mean?" "He stayed near the back," Dante said, a note of grim contempt entering his voice. "Let the Renzo men take the risk of the initial approach, while he waited to see whether it worked before committing himself fully. When it became clear the plan had failed, he tried to run rather than surrender." His jaw tightened. He didn't get far. Ivy studied the quiet field, trying to reconcile the image of violence with the peaceful scene in front of her now. What happens to him? Legally, I mean. Real consequences, not just internal affairs asking questions. "Trespass onto private property with an armed group is a serious charge on its own," Dante said. "Combined with the financial records tying him to organized crime and the conspiracy charges that come with orchestrating an armed incursion, he's looking at considerably more than a quiet suspension this time." Leo made sure the right prosecutor's office received everything this morning, someone with no ties to the department covering for him previously. "You planned that too. Which prosecutor's office would receive it?" "I planned every piece I could control," Dante said simply. "It's the only way to make sure a man like that doesn't simply talk his way free again." They walked back toward the house in comfortable silence, and it was only once they reached the study that Dante laid out the remaining details, filling in the parts of the plan Ivy had not yet heard. Inside the study, Dante laid out everything that had happened while Ivy sat listening, piecing together a plan that had clearly been forming since long before their conversation at the farmhouse the previous night. Leo's contacts inside the Renzo organization, the same lieutenant grown weary of the old man's reckless ambitions, had agreed to feed false information about troop movements while quietly alerting Dante to the real plan taking shape. Rather than simply defending the estate, Dante had used the advance warning to set his own trap, allowing Callum and the small group of Renzo men to believe they were approaching an unprepared target, when in truth, every step of their approach through the eastern field had been anticipated and contained before real danger reached the house itself. "No one was seriously hurt," Dante said. "A few bruises, a few scrapes." Callum's men realized quickly they were badly outmatched and surrendered rather than escalating further. "And Callum himself?" Dante's expression turned grim with satisfaction. "Detained, along with enough evidence, thanks to weeks of financial records Leo's contacts compiled, to make sure this doesn't end with a quiet release and a transfer to another department." "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that connects him directly to organized crime figures while still employed as a detective," Leo said, stepping into the doorway with a folder in hand. "Payments received in exchange for information about ongoing investigations. Attempts to use department resources to track a private citizen without legitimate cause, and now, Attempted trespass and conspiracy, tied to an armed incursion onto private property. He set the folder down on the desk. We made sure copies reached exactly the right people this morning. People who have no reason to protect a corrupt detective once his corruption becomes impossible to ignore or explain away. Ivy stared at the folder, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You're saying this is actually over? That he can't come after me anymore? He'll spend the coming months fighting for his own freedom instead of hunting yours, Dante said. Internal Affairs will want answers about every buried complaint filed against him, starting with yours. The Renzo family, meanwhile, will want to distance themselves entirely from a detective who just got caught in an armed conflict that accomplished nothing except exposing their own involvement to people they'd rather keep in the dark. Callum has become useless to everyone who once found him convenient. Ivy sat back slowly, feeling something in her chest release that had been clenched tight for weeks, so tight she had almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. I don't know how to process this, actually being free. You don't have to process it all at once, Dante said gently. It's still fresh. Give yourself time. Before Leo left the study, he paused at the doorway, turning back toward Ivy with an expression far different from the guarded suspicion he had shown her that very first morning. I owe you an apology, he said. I was certain, when Dante first brought you into this house, that you'd bring nothing but risk to everything we've built here. I still believe caution was the right instinct, but I was wrong about you. Ivy blinked, surprised by the admission. You don't owe me anything, Leo. Your caution wasn't unreasonable. I did bring danger to this house, whether I meant to or not. You brought danger that was already circling us long before you arrived, Leo said. You simply gave us a reason to finally deal with it directly, instead of waiting for it to strike on its own terms. That's not the same thing as being a liability. In this line of work, it's closer to being an asset, whether you intended it or not. A faint, reluctant smile touched his mouth. Dante trusted you before any of the rest of us did. I've learned, over the years, that his instincts about people are rarely wrong. Thank you, Ivy said quietly, meaning it fully. For everything you and your people did to keep me safe, even when you weren't certain I deserved it. You've more than proven that you did. Leo nodded once, a gesture of genuine respect, before slipping out of the study and leaving Ivy alone, with her thoughts for the first time in what felt like days. She sat there for a while afterward, turning over everything that had happened since that first terrified night in the stable, still hardly able to believe how completely her circumstances had transformed in such a short span of time. The fear that had driven her from town to town, hotel to hotel, was finally gone, replaced by something she had not expected to feel again so soon. The quiet, steady sense of having people around her who would stand firm against whatever came next. Later that afternoon, once Leo had left to oversee the final details with his contacts, and the house had settled into a rare, genuine quiet, Ivy found Dante in the stable, standing beside the same horse whose stall she had slept in on that first desperate night. He looked up as she approached, something soft and unguarded in his expression that she had rarely seen from him amid all the danger of the past days. I called your sister while you were resting, he said. Told her, with your permission I hoped I could assume, that it was safe to reach you directly again. Ivy's breath caught. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. I know how much it's cost you, staying quiet with her all this time. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair back from her face, his touch gentle, in a way that felt entirely different from the careful, clinical way he had once cleaned the cut on her hand that first morning. You should call her properly, tonight. Tell her everything, if you're ready. I will, Ivy said, then hesitated, studying his face carefully. What happens now, Dante? To me, I mean, now that I don't have to run anymore. He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question, with the same weight he seemed to give every decision that mattered. That depends entirely on what you want, he said finally. You're free to go anywhere now, back to your old life, your old job, your sister's spare room, until you find your footing again. No one will stop you, and I won't pretend that choice doesn't have its appeal, after everything you've been through here. But I meant what I said before you left for the vineyard, Dante said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability plain in his eyes. I want you to stay, not because you need protecting anymore, Because somewhere between that first morning in this stable and this one, I stopped thinking of you as someone I was simply keeping safe, and started thinking of you as someone I wanted beside me, for reasons that have nothing to do with danger at all. Ivy felt tears gather unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, the weight of weeks of fear finally giving way to something warmer, something she had not let herself hope for since long before Callum had ever shown her his true nature. I climbed a fence 3 weeks ago because I had nowhere left to run, she said softly. I never expected to find somewhere I'd actually want to stay. And now? Now, she said, stepping closer. I think I finally understand what my mother used to say about the right kind of danger, that sometimes the safest place isn't the quietest one. It's the one where someone is willing to stand between you and everything trying to hurt you, without ever asking for anything in return. Dante's expression softened into something Ivy had never seen from him before, unguarded and entirely certain. Then stay, he said simply, not as someone hiding, as someone choosing to be here. Ivy reached up, resting her palm against the same jaw she had bandaged so carefully days earlier, and felt the last of her fear finally settle into something quieter, something that felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, remarkably like peace. That evening, she kept her promise to call her sister properly, settling onto the terrace with the small phone Dante had given her weeks earlier, dialing the number, without the tight, watchful fear that had shadowed every previous call. Nora answered on the first ring, as though she had been waiting with the phone in her hand for hours. Ivy? It's really over, Nora. The words came out shakier than she intended. Relief and exhaustion tangled together after weeks of holding herself together through sheer force of will. Callum's been arrested. He can't hurt anyone anymore. There was a long silence on the line, followed by the unmistakable sound of her sister crying, quiet at first, and then openly. The kind of tears that come only after weeks of carefully suppressed terror finally find permission to surface. I've been so scared, Nora admitted. Every day, wondering if today would be the day I got a call telling me something happened to you, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I know. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you more, couldn't explain everything sooner. Don't apologize, Nora said fiercely. Don't you dare apologize for surviving this. Just tell me you're really safe now. Tell me it's true. It's true, Ivy said, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt the words settle fully into her chest, without any lingering doubt trailing behind them. I'm safe. I'm actually safe. They talked for nearly an hour, longer than any call Dante had allowed during the danger, catching up on weeks of missed conversation, Nora asking careful, gentle questions about the people who had sheltered her sister through it all. Ivy found herself describing Dante without fully meaning to, the calm certainty in his voice, the careful way he had bandaged her hand that first morning, the promise he had made in the stable only hours earlier. He sounds like someone worth staying for, Nora said quietly, once Ivy finished. I think he might be, Ivy admitted, smiling faintly into the darkening evening. I think, for the first time in a very long time, I actually believe that. They said their goodbyes with promises to see each other soon, properly, without secrecy or fear standing between them, and Ivy sat alone on the terrace for a long while afterward, watching the stars emerge slowly over the quiet estate, feeling something loosen inside her that had been wound tight for weeks beyond counting. Outside the stable behind her, the horse she had once hidden beside let out a low, contented sound, carrying faintly across the courtyard into the warm, settled quiet of the evening, promising a future neither Ivy nor Dante had dared imagine when this had all begun in the shadows of a stranger's stable.